It's hard to believe. It is so hard to believe we are in late November. Regular season's almost over. Conference championships are almost upon us. Then you got signing day. Then, of course, the college football playoff. Then you got New Year's, the Rose Bowl, and the Natty. This thing flies. Man, well, today's podcast interview flew by as well. I think you're really going to dig it. Here we are in season 5, and today we have Peter Burns. Peter Burns, you know that name because he's the face and the voice of the SEC Conference, the SEC Network. He's on Sirius XM Radio. He's on the SEC Network, as I mentioned. He's on ESPN. He's everywhere. But what I love is where he came from. And our conversation today touches upon, of course, Pac-12 versus SEC, but also his journey, his path, and most importantly, his passion and how he listened to it and what he learned from it and how he's grown and overcome different adversities throughout his life. And to me, he's a guy who's mission-minded, but he's got a really high level of emotional intelligence, which is fundamentally defined as having the capacity to deal with your thoughts, the thoughts of others, and do it with empathy. And I think Peter's journey is one that is beautiful. I'm so pumped to share it. Much like the last couple guests and really all of season 5. If you've missed any episodes, just go to yogiroth.com and you can check out Matt Hasselbeck. That episode was fire. Ricky Williams, that was a live one, as was Antonio Gates. Rachel Joy Barbeau, who really is impacting manhood in college football. And really this entire year, from Jed Fish, who I think is going to be a hot name for head coaching jobs coming up here in a couple weeks, Eric Dickerson, and on and on and on. So just check him out at yogiroth.com. And if you want to dive into college football, subscribe to my newsletter, the How Great Is Ball newsletter. Try to kick that out every week or so and just give you insights from the road as I'm talking to coaches and players and just having fun around this beautiful game of college football. All right, speaking of fun and speaking of college football, every time I watch film, which is an absolute blast, I pop a can of Kona Red coffee. If you don't know anything about Kona Red, check them out at KonaRed.com. They're my partner of this podcast, and they source some of the rarest, most sought-after coffee in the world. And they do it all from Hawaii. And I love that because every coffee cherry, it's handpicked. So, they live by the phrase that we love here on this pod, which is the way you do small things is the way you do all things. And they do just that. Everything is big time over there. And they have all the types of coffee you can dream of. Right? They have premium coffee beans. My wife loves that in our home. They got the cold brew coffee. I reference the little cans. I love the cans. And they even have a juice, the Hawaiian Cascara juice, because they don't want to waste any element of the coffee cherry. So check them out. Go to KonaRed.com. Utilize the code YOGI20. Get yourself 20% off. Check it out. And if you're shopping, you're on the street, you're running errands, they got it at Vons, Albertsons, Pavilions, Ralph's, Bristol Farms, Sprouts. I've seen it at Whole Foods when I'm over at UCLA watching the Bruins get ready. They got a big game this week, the rivalry game against the USC Trojans. So wherever you need it, Kona Red will come in and offer you a little bit of support, a little pick-me-up, a little refocus aspect to your day. All right, that being said, today, this conversation is going to offer you a lot to your day. Peter Burns. I told him we'd only keep him for 30. We went over that. I could have kept him for about 4 hours. We kept him for about 40 minutes. So check it out. Listen, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Of course, comment on iTunes. That always helps out the algorithm, Apple Podcasts. But wherever you listen to podcasts, we hope to be. And of course, we always love to hear your feedback. So I'm going to get out of the way. This is Peter Burns of the SEC Network. And of course, SEC football, but his journey, which is much, much more. Really looking forward to today's guest, as I referenced in the open, so we'll jump right into it. Peter Burns, SEC Network, SEC This Morning.
Yogi, what's up, man? It's kind of crazy when you put it that way. I'm a little affiliated with the conference, but, much to the chagrin of people on my Twitter mentions, but also gives me, like it is. Like when I want to know Pac-12 stuff, I come to you, and hopefully when you want to know SEC stuff, you come to me, so it works well.
Yes, exactly. We'll get all into that. But this podcast is solely based on the premise of trying to seek and uncover what it means to be human in sports around the globe, and specifically, obviously, college football and the football season. And I've been tracking you for a while. We finally connected, I think it was last year, via our profession, and now we get to the conversation, man. So we'll get to the football stuff here in a little bit, but I wanted to dive in to you and a couple questions that aren't necessarily SEC or Pac-12 related, if that's cool, if we can get going that way.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, cool. So when I read about you and learn about you, I see somebody that when faced with adversity, you went for it. And I want to ask you right off the bat, curious what your relationship was with the word dreams as a kid.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, dreaming for a kid, I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and I can remember, being best friends with my dad, who's a cancer survivor. And so he graduated school late over at LSU as a chemical engineering major. And so I was 7 years old when he finally graduated after he beat cancer. And so my memories growing up are always like going to LSU games with them and going to games. And so for me, dreams was about doing something great in sports, whether it be basketball, which was my first love, or then baseball. And then it turned out to be golf, which I played collegiate golf or in college. I think for me, dreams have always kind of started athletically. And then when I realized that, hey, you could limit or achieve those dreams to a certain extent, but at some point you reach kind of this breaking point where you just realize, hey, you kind of not necessarily topped out, but you can't take it to another level. I'm not going to be Kyle Korver or, or in the NBA, or I'm not going to go out there and be Alex Bregman in baseball. How do you reevaluate those dreams? And I think to me that ended up becoming business and ultimately sports media.
Oh, that's pretty cool. So how were they cultivated? Like when you would go to an LSU game, or you would say, hey, I want to become the next shooting guard in the NBA. Like when you would say that to your dad, as you reference your best friend, how would he receive those and cultivate or put water on that fire? Curious what that dynamic was like.
Yeah, I think for the paradigm shift in that family part of our background was really my dad pushing me. And he was pushed, and I think that's just an older generation that was pushed by his family and his father, and he would push me to make sure that even if I wasn't the most talented person, I could at least outwork everybody, right? Like, especially when I started trying to look at golf and focus in on that, he knew, hey, you're not going to have the best swing, you're not going to hit it the farthest, but did you go out and practice when it was raining and everybody else was inside? Like, were you the one putting in the extra 45 minutes? Because once you added all that stuff up, then while I didn't have necessarily the talent to get there, that didn't mean I can't get the work ethic to get there. And I think that was him being just an Air Force guy, a guy that was a cancer survivor. And the idea of, hey, you can achieve anything. And even if you can't, how can you change the calculus of it? How can you change, okay, well, maybe you can't go down this route. Doesn't mean it's a dead end. How do you redirect and go a different way? And I think really that's kind of what's led me to where I'm at right now, is just realize, man, there's a lot more people. There's a lot more Yogi Roths out there. There's a lot more Laura Rutledges. There's a lot more Mike Greenbergs out there that are more successful, more talented. But can I put in the work to at least kind of, make it a little bit of a more of a question mark that, of getting to that point in my life. And that's where I'm at.
Yeah. That's a red thread that I think kind of spins through everybody who's a high achiever. I can remember growing up, I had a sign next to my bed. It's still there in our house in Pennsylvania. And it says, hard work always pays off and good things always happen to good people. And I don't know for you, but what is your relationship with the phrase work and putting in so much time? Because for me, it got toxic. Like it sucked the joy and zapped the joy, and it was just about the work. And I wonder if you ever dealt with that.
Well, how real quick before I answer that, how was it toxic for you? Like when did you get consumed by it?
Yeah, I didn't realize it till later. To be quite honest with you, I didn't realize it till probably relatively recently. Where for me, it was always about the work. Right, I would outwork anybody. It'd be 4 a.m. I'd be doing the strength shoes over garbage cans in the driveway. Or it'd be 2 a.m. I'd be shooting jump shots after shoveling the snow. And I enjoyed it and loved it. I don't think I ever celebrated within it though. And after I was around Coach Carroll at SC, I really realized man, you have to celebrate the work, and it was it wasn't about going back to work, right? It was about going back to work, right? And my tone and my smile and my demeanor change. And what I recognize is that I enjoyed it when it was really hard, but I don't think I let myself ever enjoy it. Well, even if it was
the fruits of the labor, right? Yeah. And that is really kind of the payoff. But I think all the high achievers that we've met, I don't know if they ever want to get to the mountaintop. I can't remember. I don't know if it was Urban Meyer who said it about, hey, when he first won his national championship, he kind of looked around and thought, all right, I'm here. well, now what do we do? And it's really, and I tell this to coaches all the time about, right here, right now, this coach like PJ Fleck in what he's doing at Minnesota. Like I look at it and go, it's never going to get better than right here, right now for PJ Fleck. Like he's got this program going. He's working hard. He's seeing it, but right now is actually even better than him. If he takes a quote unquote a bigger job somewhere else. Like I think the fun is the journey of getting to that point and having the work pay off. But I think it's also hard because that's when people rest in their laurels, right? Or become complacent, that if you ever stop working that hard and don't enjoy the work to a certain extent, then you kind of just say, okay, I've done enough. And that's when you get passed by. And I think ultimately competitive people, which I really am, like if it comes to, Monopoly with my wife, rock, paper, scissors, it doesn't matter. I want to beat her down. And she's the same way about her life as well, too. I think you have to have a competitive gene to be great in anything you do.
Yeah, no, very well said. So we heard a little voice in the background, man. You got two little ones now.
Yeah.
Are they both born on Halloween?
Crazy, right? Yeah. 2 years ago, my little daughter, Bo, was born on Halloween. And then we just had our son, Thomas, who was born about 2 weeks ago there on Halloween. And, she's a baby girl and baby boy. So I got that going. And it was kind of cool because about 2 years ago, for people who kind of know my story, I'm adopted. I'm adopted. My little brother's adopted. My little sister's adopted. My mom's Cuban. My dad's Cajun. My sister's 100% South Korean. My brother's half Brazilian. And I'm some kind of Cajun mutt. I don't even know what I am. And so when my daughter was born 2 years ago, that was the first time when I was in that room and she came out. That was the first time I looked at somebody and I was actually related to them that I knew. Like, this person is my DNA. This person, I share the same blood. This everything. Like, it's been kind of an emotional couple of years, from my upbringing to where we're at right now, and we're pretty blessed with two little ones right now.
Wow. So how old were you when you were adopted?
We were all my brother, my sister, and myself were all 2 weeks old. So we never really went through kind of a foster parent or, hey, we're adopted at 4 months or 4 years or whatnot. So growing up, mom and dad were just mom and dad. We didn't know that we were adopted really until until we were old enough to understand the concept of adoption. We were told. My parents never kept it a secret or whatnot. I probably was maybe 8 or 9 when I could probably fully wrap my head around what being adopted truly meant. And and to this day, my dad's my best friend. I'm really close with my mom, and to me, those are my parents, whether or not they're the ones who birthed me or not.
Yeah, no, I love that. I remember. I'm curious what it was like for you growing up, but I grew up in a household. Mom is a refugee from the Middle East. Parents in Eastern philosophy. Clearly, I have a weird name, but we grew up in in northeastern Pennsylvania, kind of the middle of nowhere. Not necessarily the breeding grounds for like the Jewish weird name, brothers gay, like nothing really fit there.
Right.
And now I'm married and we've got a blended family. And I'd love to ask you, how did you operate? Was it ever, hey, it's a superpower for me that all three of us as kids, we look different. Maybe we have a different story than Johnny in second grade.
Yeah, I think there's two things for me personally that when the term operate, I think one is just being around a family that had Cuban ties and had South Korean ties and Brazilian ties, and my dad being Cajun. Like, you just realize people were people, and that's the way we were always brought up. White, black, yellow, it didn't matter. Like, hey, that's your sister, that's your brother, that's a friend, that's somebody, that's a school teacher. Like, we never really, in places, especially in the deep South, where there's a lot of, bigotry and racial issues. Like, we were never brought up in a household like that because our family looked like the United Nations, right? Like, we just knew that, hey, I love this person loves me, or I disagree with this person, but this person disagrees with me. It didn't really matter who they were. And I think that helped. And another thing I think helped me get to where I'm at right now is the fact of, my family, my dad, like I said, cancer survivor, puts himself through school, graduates as a chemical engineering major. and works his butt off, and starts getting all these good jobs in the gas and oil industry, and kept rising up and up and up the ladders until he ultimately was the senior vice president for a big corporation. That we moved around a lot as kids. Like, I think I went to 13 different schools by the time I went to high school. And that was defining for me. That was something that every single year when we moved, you had to make new friends. Had to go out of your comfort zone. You had to learn your new places to eat, and you had to be able to reinvent yourself still while keeping an identity and being true to yourself. And I think that has kind of helped me stay on my toes throughout my life and not being kind of complacent of staying in one place at the same time.
What type of cancer did your dad survive?
Testicular. And that's ultimately why they couldn't have kids. So ended up surviving that. And, the modern medicine is crazy. I mean, you think about it now, how hard it is, to survive cancer, and, there's treatment obviously, but think about it in 1984, wow. My dad's a pretty strong guy, and, he's 5'11", 220 or so, pretty stout guy. And I can remember my first memories of my dad are being in a hospital bed, and he weighs about 125 pounds, and just, crazy. And to think, the hard work that he did and taking me to all these games, and it's just amazing what parents can do, for their kids, as right now with your little one. And I'm starting to learn with my two kiddos.
Yeah. My dad's a cancer survivor too. And what I love about how you describe your relationship with him is that there is this bond between father, son that in sports, I think we come across very often. And I say that on the backbone of, as an athlete, I was always taught that, yeah, you can cry after a win or after a loss, but that's pretty much the only areas, right? You could be like Michael Jordan crying when the champagne's flowing in your eyes, right. Russell Wilson, right? And I don't know why that is, but it's like Ed Orgeron. He can get choked up after the game against Alabama, but God forbid you ever do it anywhere else. And nobody ever said that to me. It was just kind of innate as a jock. And then after he was diagnosed and beat it, it took me like 5 years to even deal with it. And then when I did, it hit me like a waterfall, and boom, it was over. And I asked him to go for a walk and talk about it. And he said, sure. He didn't realize where the walk was. And we ended up walking in Spain and Portugal along what is known as the Camino de Santiago, which is a famous pilgrimage. And we went through every day a different decade of his life. And to this day, other than my wife and our son, like, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to me.
I love that, because I don't feel like we communicate enough like that, right? And I don't know if it's the machismo part, and I tell that to my wife all the time, is that my dad's my best friend, and I know he loves me. He would move mountains for me, but he was never brought up in a person that says I love you out loud, right? Like, I know he does, and his actions are there, and so it's not as if, I'm worried that he doesn't love me, and he never acts that way. Like, clearly the actions are there, but I don't think we have enough of those conversations, because I think as deep down, Yogi, as guys, we're kind of taught that we don't talk about feelings that way, and that, hey, you gotta man up, son. You gotta be this person, especially in the jock culture, that a lot of people don't have the courage to go to their dad and have that walk, and or for them, they think it's just so awkward that it doesn't. And it sends chills on my skin when you say that, because I'm like, I think we should know more about, our family members that we don't ask those questions about. And that's something I definitely want to do with my dad, because I know we have those relationships where we go play golf together and we're great friends and we do all this stuff together. But sometimes I think I don't know why, I have never even asked those questions about, what about this? What about that? You just kind of assume, hey, that's my dad, and you kind of move forward. So that's interesting. I like that.
Yeah, well, I used to always just think that we learn the most about our parents presumptuously at the celebration of their life, when they're no longer with us here, and whatever you believe in, they're somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And I just think that's jacked up. So I always try to, at least through that process of I made a film about it, is just to ask questions that we don't know the answer to. So now at every holiday, that's what we do around our table. Everybody has to ask everyone a question they don't know the answer to. And it's been a joy, because it's one question, and say there's 8 people, like, you'd think that's 2 minutes a question, but it ends up being about 3 hours because the one question spawns into like 10 other questions. And then you learn about a whole decade of somebody's life that you never knew. It's pretty rad. So
do you find that people are open to the idea? And like now that you guys done it before, obviously more people understand it, but was there hesitancy the first time you do that in an open environment?
I have a firm belief here, and I'd be wondering if you would agree or not, but I think everyone wants to tell their story, right? Why do we have a Facebook status update? Why do we have social media? It's like, hey, I want to let you know what's happening. Mm-hmm. And I think with that older generation, they clearly didn't grow up in it. Some of our parents do have that now, and they'll post something every once in a while, but you still have the innate, mindset of, I have something to say. And I think everyone has something to say. You just got to ask a good question. I mean, look at your job, right? I'm sure interviewing Nick Saban is much different than interviewing Dan Mullen, right? I just look at those two guys and I'm like, yeah, one guy's going to give me 3 answers to the same question, and one guy might just answer the question, right? Unless you know him. So I think it's the same deal with people, older people. You just ask, hey, so how did you meet mom? Like, I was asking literal questions like that, like, how did you propose? And I think parents, and we are them now, we ask our kids all the time, hey, how's your day? Did you dream last night? What are you doing today? How you feeling? They don't ask us a ton after probably, I'm guessing here because our guy's 4, but I bet after like 12, the questions coming our way are few and far between. So you go through 10, 20, 30 years of not asking questions and trying to pull from other people. And that's what hit me from going through that process.
No, it's again, and I think it's also, and that's one of the reasons why, like I've got on my pinned tweet on my Twitter account is a blog that I wrote a couple of years ago about how the worst days turn into the most important days. And it kind of, went through all the challenges I had in my life to get to where I'm at. And I wrote that simply for the fact of I sat down one day and I'm like, you know what? Like, if I shared this, I don't even know why I put it out there, but when I shared it, there were so many other people that said, I'm so surprised that you would open up like that. I'm like, well, you're right. Just like you said, Yogi, like everyone has a story to tell. It's just a matter of, how are you going to tell it? And I have found that luckily my story has changed and touched some people. And I think that's why you have to share stuff like that and be open. And I think in our industry, a lot of people aren't. A lot of people are so egotistical that they're afraid to admit when they're wrong, or that they're afraid that they're not going to come across, professional or people are going to take them seriously. And I find the more you open up as a host and the more you open up as a person in this position, the more people will accept you and say, hey, you know what? I disagree with that take, but I understand why you thought that way. And I think that's good for communication.
Oh, yeah, especially in the world we're in now. I mean, we're going to get into Pac-12 versus SEC, but think of like Republicans versus Democrats. Like, I remember after the election, I called my dad. I bet you did too. And he said, your only job now is to have conversations. So when you go on college campuses, when you meet people that have a different viewpoint, don't complain, don't whine, just ask good questions. And I was like, and didn't flinch. It was like moments notice. And I was like, okay. Yeah. I'm good. Let's just start asking good questions. All right.
It seems so simple on the base level, right? But yet a lot of times it's tough because we get in these echo chambers. And that's why I'm where I'm at with social media right now, is that I love it and I hate it because I feel like everyone kind of just gets their bunker trench mentality of this is the way and I'm not going to think anything else. But in the other part about it, like you and I connected, I think first via social media, and we can exchange stuff. And I can hear, I had you on my show talking about how I didn't think much about the Pac-12, but after having a conversation with you, I looked at it a little bit differently. And I think we don't have those conversations more. It's so funny that social media is all about sharing, yet it creates less sharing and dialogue maybe than ever.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to bring, I love that you just went where I was going. So I've read your Facebook post 2 years ago, and I was like, who is this guy? I needed to do some work. And kind of been tracking it. And I've seen Adam Amin, our mutual friend, who's contributed to it. And I loved everything about it because it was, it's a hot button word, but it was so vulnerable, right? You shared, and I'll quote you, as I walked inside the front door, everything in my house was gone. Gone was all of my furniture, my 2 dogs, my wife of 5 years, and what I thought was my future. And I read that and I was like, I can't imagine it. And thank you for sharing. And I can't wait to see what happens next. And what was next was fascinating as you took people through, and I'll make sure I link the post in the show notes here, but you took us through your journey. And that journey, to me, and I love your take on it, it went from shock, holy shit, what just happened, then to getting fired, then to a total change in mindset, and then to despair when you lost one of your friends, to now taking a chance and betting on yourself. And here we are years later, one of the most successful people in the industry. How would you categorize the journey that began when that Facebook note happened in reality?
It's funny is in how that whole thing came down is I was sitting down one day, and I can't remember, I think it was like in January, and I had a day off, and, Facebook Memories pops up and it tells you, hey, here's what you did 5 years ago and 8 years ago today. And it's always kind of a fun time hop to go back. And I remember clicking on it, and it said, I had a status update on Facebook or Twitter that said, hey, I've just been relieved of my, I just got fired. And I'm like, man, that's crazy. And to think about how I could have handled so many different bad news things in my life and just been kind of the woe is me and given up for it. Or I could try to find a way, like we talked earlier, like, hey, you're going to reach a roadblock. How do you get around that roadblock? And so to me, going back to my family, my father was always like, all right, if you can't do this, what can you do? And how do you turn this into a positive? And that always sounds like a maxim that parents use. But for me, I literally walked into my house. I'd been married for 5 years. She was love of my life, never had a fight. And she, was living in a kind of a model lifestyle. And she had like a midlife model crisis. And sure enough, I woke up one morning and it was like I had lost my best friend overnight, like in a car accident. I'm like, how are you going to get up? And for me, on that aspect of it, a lot of it, Yogi, was just like, I'm going to prove, whether it's right or wrong, like the quote proverbial chip on the shoulder, I'm going to prove that I'm somebody that was deserving of not being left, that I'm going to make something of my life. And that kind of led me from, dropping a job in the gas and oil industry that I had to saying, life is short. Who knows what happens? Go chase your dream. And that started. And honestly, that piece of bad news that could have defined anybody. And it to me, it was just the first thing I looked at as a catalyst to change my life, as opposed to kind of wallow in it. I vividly remember this. My dad telling me whenever my wife had left, he said, and I was having trouble sleeping, and he said, let me ask you this. Can you go through your life and would you do anything different? Can you sleep at bed? Can you go to at night when you lay your head on the pillow? Do you think that you were the best husband and best partner that you could have been? And I said, yes. And he goes, if that's the case, you should never lose a wink of sleep in your life, because that was outside, that was somebody else's world. That was not yours. And, that kind of helped me get my mind right and start spinning it forward to have, a better journey through life after that.
Wow. I love that your dad said that to you. To me, it was like you had to look yourself in the eye and be like, hey, how did I do? Did I leave it all on the grass? Herm Edwards, that's his favorite quote, or one of my favorite quotes from him. Got to leave it on the grass. Got to leave it on the grass. And I felt like I thought of that for you. The next thing I want to ask you about is, and you talk about this in that blog post, is that you got fired from a job in 2010, not due to performance, but because, your quote, it was because I had grown too cocky and people were sick and tired of putting up with me. They were right. I had grown too big for my britches and frankly needed the reality check. We're in an industry that everybody, I think, is a little too big for their britches, right? I mean, you got a couple 100,000 people that are going to watch you every weekend or every show or follow your social media. We all have an inflated sense of our reality, and that's what college football is. I think it's the smallest sport with the biggest egos, which is great because I built my life around the sport. So I love it and support it, but I think I got to call it out for what it is. How do you balance that now of, you're in air quotes, Peter Burns, right? And you're also Peter Burns who's got to clean up poop from your two kids at times.
And honestly, the best part about that is finding the right partner. My wife, Lauren, mother of my two beautiful children, is finding a partner that's willing to call you out. Like if she would have heard you say, quote, air quote, Peter Burns, you'd have been like, oh my God, this is the dumbest thing I've ever heard, because that's what she does. And again, I think the reason why, after I had first turned single, I started making a lot of money. I was doing really well in coming up and being a radio show host in Texas, and I didn't have anybody to keep me in check. And all of a sudden, I kind of got full of myself. It was, and we see it, right? We see, athletes that are just having a ton of success. Antonio Brown, a guy that has a ton of success right now in his own world. And yet, so the reality gets skewed. And unless you have somebody that loves you and that's able to communicate to you, to going like, what the hell are you doing? Like Bruce Bowen, Bruce Bowen, the former Spur, and Bruce would tell me that. I developed a good friendship with Bruce when I was single and things were going well. And Bruce would say, what are you doing, man? Like, why are you trying to act like this guy that he gets the bottle service and driving the fancy car and dating all these girls and bragging about it and stuff like that? Like, dude, I know you. You're a good person. Don't do this. But to me, in a weird way, Yogi, at that point in my life, it was more to put on this show that what had happened to me with my first wife didn't affect me. Like, look at me now. I'm living the life. And it's the greatest thing. And I had people telling me that no, you're not. You're just coming across as a douchebag. Like, what are you doing? But I was so caught up that I didn't listen. Like, they didn't know what was happening. Like, I knew I could handle this. And the best thing that ever happened to me was getting fired from that job, because I realized, I was being that guy. I was chauvinistic. I was an idiot. I was braggadocious. I was everything about that. But at the same point is how much I missed doing something. And when my profession was taken, when rightfully taken away from me, because of my own actions, I had to look myself in the mirror and go, no, they were right. And put yourself in this situation again by working hard, but also realize that tomorrow you could be out of a job. There was nothing more lonely whenever I got fired than driving up, I-35 from San Antonio to Dallas when I was looking for jobs up there in sports radio, and thinking that 5-hour drive going, I can't believe this. Like, I had the world the world was my oyster. And I've just, because I wanted to brag about stuff that was empty, and I got to start my life over. And that's when I realized, like, you got to have somebody that's going to keep you in check and be humble every single day. Like, I've got this on my radio. I've got a radio studio in my house. I've got this thing called this little thing printed out that has the number 50,000 on it. And it's a reminder to me that I look at it and go, if I went away tomorrow, there'd be 50,000 people that would apply for the job that I have legitimately. And it's a way for me to look at that every single day to realize how freaking lucky I am to be able to wake up and do this and talk sports and to talk with you and to hang out with people at sporting events and to have a voice that matters. And when the day you take that for granted is the day that it's pretty much over for you.
I love that. Yeah, I talk about that a lot with our version of you, which is Mike Yam and Ashley Adamson at our network, and couldn't agree more. Okay, so I said I'd only keep you 30, but I lied. Can I keep you a few more minutes? No,
listen, I love this because, again, we don't have these conversations when we do these, so it's always, and heck, I even probably thought we were just going to talk LSU and and Pac-12, which is always good, but I just love being able to have conversations. It's just a conversation, right? I think that's what we need to do more in our media world for sure.
Okay, cool. All right, so I want to get into working at the SEC network. I loved reading and learning about how you got the job. You never read teleprompter. I'm in the same boat. And you just kind of went for it and you got it. And now you're there and you're the face of this network. And one of many. I don't want to put you on too much blast, but I think you're the face of that network. That being said, what's that like when you represent a conference and your fan base is coming there specifically for arguments supporting your conference? And how do you view your job and probably more importantly, your responsibility at the SEC network?
Yeah, it's a fascinating, you're really good at this interviewing thing, because it's a fascinating question, because I want to go 7 different directions. But I struggle with it personally because I wear several different hats, right? So I'm the anchor for the SEC network. That's my 1A job, right? Is to be the anchor for the network that has 14 schools where we love every single one of the 14 schools, quote unquote, equally, right? Like that's an ideal world. At the same point, I host a Sunday morning ESPN radio show where they don't want me to be the anchor of the SEC network. They want me to be an ESPN voice of radio and, not give quote unquote propaganda. And I also host a Sirius XM show Monday through Friday that's it's SEC related. So I wear all these different hats and I always struggle on, how to be true. And I'll never, and to make sure that you don't come across as, oh, he just works for the SEC network, or, oh, he's just an ESPN radio talking head. And I struggle with that every single day. For instance, a couple of days ago, Chad Morris in Arkansas got blown out by Western Kentucky. I mean, it was bad and ultimately led to his firing. And right before we have our show, right after the Arkansas game, I'm thinking, how in the world do we handle this? These are the real world issues, Yogi, and you know it in the Pac-12. Like, am I supposed to say, well, here's what went well for Arkansas today? Like, nothing went well. They got blown out. Like, I can't sell this. But at the same point, you are affiliated with the school, which is affiliated with the conference, which is affiliated to a business partner. So how do you toe the line of being critical at the same time not upsetting anybody? And basically the call was, and it comes all the way from Steph Drewley, which is kind of our head of ESPN, is she brought up a great point. They're like, say stuff on air that you feel comfortable that if you said to that person, whether it's a coach or that team or that athletic director, that you wouldn't mind if they overheard you and you were just having a conversation. And I always found that interesting. They're like, if you can say Chad Morris has lost control of this team and it's probably time for a change, well, then you say it. And I've always appreciated that out of Steph Drewley at ESPN because she said, we're not propaganda for anybody. If you can back up what you believe, that's the reason why we hired you. Now, to say something just to get a rise and to troll people, that's reasons why people don't work for our company anymore when they do that. Now, to have a real belief and to be able to back, as long as you can back it up, then we get full credit to be able to do that.
Oh, that's really well said. So what do you think about it right now? I mean, this is going to air after the next weekend of games, so the CFP rankings are going to be flipped upside down. Who knows what will happen after another week? But there's a lot of arguments that go on, right? And I went to the mock committee selection. I'm curious if you went to that as well.
I did as well. It's really enlightening, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
it's eye-opening when you do the process versus from the outside looking in what you think the process looks like.
Totally. And, we could talk about our issues on another show maybe, or what we love about it. But overall, there's 13 really smart people in the room. But fundamentally, each individual has to decide what best means. Best can mean body of work. Best can mean today. Best can mean when you're healthy a month from now. How do you deal with that when you are, making an argument for, let's just call it a one-loss non-conference champion versus other conferences who, like the Pac-12, we have 9 conference games, right? I know what I'm touting all day long. You see my stuff. Like, yeah, we're talking that way. Knowing that you represent a flag, as you just talked about, and knowing that everybody doesn't have the same path, and knowing that there's more hype in the SEC based on just more love and more attention for that conference, and you got to give them the props, more wins.
Right.
How do you handle all of that in the role that you're in among the 3 different jobs that you described?
Well, as soon as I say something, right, and it'll always, especially on Twitter, because on Twitter I'm very SEC centric because that's who I am, just as a fan, not even a media person. I just love the conference and love the storylines. But as soon as I always say something, like people will come out and go, "Oh, you're just an SEC apologist saying that," or "That's what ESPN pays you to say." And I'm like, that's not the case. Trust me, I don't get directive from anybody over there. In fact, they always make sure that we try not to be that way. But like take for instance the college football playoff committee thing. Is that Emmanuel Acho earlier today or earlier this week was talking on Get Up saying, "Hey, I'm sick and tired of people force feeding the SEC narrative down our throat. Like they make us eat our vegetables, which is the SEC." And then I start thinking about it and I go, okay, well that's a fair point. It definitely gets a lot of media coverage because that's where a lot of the interest is. But I look at the college football playoff committee. You've been a part of that selection committee. there's 13 members of that selection committee. 10 of them have never coached, never been affiliated with the SEC, right? They are outside the footprint. They are not an SEC flag bearer. They're not anything. And if 10 of the 13 of those individuals, when they get together, the quote unquote smartest minds of college football, and they say that 5 of the top 12 teams are in one conference, and this is not 9 SEC guys saying this. This is 10 of the 13 have never touched the SEC schools or affiliation whatsoever. If that's the case, why am I not to believe that? Why am I not to believe that that is not the best conference in college football? Now, the problem is that's when it's best versus most deserving, right? Like, I think Alabama is one of the 4 best teams in the country. I don't think they deserve to be in the college football playoff because I think you have to be so much better than to get that opportunity. And they've had an opportunity to do that. They lost to LSU. And frankly, I can't go to war for them or else it just wouldn't come across as genuine. You know, that would be propaganda if I said Alabama is in no matter what, blah, blah, blah. I can't do that. In fact, last year I talked against Georgia being even looked at as a 2-loss team and for the college football playoff because I didn't think that they deserved it. And Georgia fans got pissed. And I'm sure the SEC conference got upset with me that I wasn't, banging the drum for them. But I'm like, if I sell myself out for that, how is anybody ever going to take me serious on anything else that I do? And yes, I am SEC centric, but I feel like I am that way when the facts are that way, as opposed to just me trying to bang that drum like I think we see a lot in politics right now, even when the facts don't necessarily agree or the opinion agree with the facts.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, what I'd love to do, I was talking to your colleague Chris Doring about this last year. I'd love for us to just flip roles for like a week in training camp, right? And just you go to 5 Pac-12 schools, I go to 5 SEC schools, because we see on TV or when you watch film or whatever, but we don't always have, like, you can't be, you're so deep on 14 teams. I'm 3 deep, at Washington State and Stanford this weekend, or Oregon or Utah. It's just different. I think it'd be fun to drop into each other's shoes just for better conversation, if nothing else.
Well, and here's one way. I grew up an LSU fan, diehard LSU fan. That's all I cared about, right? And I hated Florida growing up because Spurrier would put up a ton of points. And I hated Alabama, before I got in the industry because they were always that rival team. And I hated Auburn for smoking cigars in Tiger Stadium after they won in '99. Like, I hated these teams. And to what you're saying of changing shoes, when I got the network anchor role, I would spend a week down at Auburn and get to know their team and their coaches and their storylines. And I came away going, they're humans too. They're not nearly I don't hate them nearly as much. And then I would go down and spend time with Florida and I go, well, actually Spurrier's a pretty cool guy. And I like this. So I've experienced that from going from all LSU and I hate all 13 teams to being down on Boots level and understanding and appreciation. And I think we don't. I don't have an appreciation like for Pac-12 football because because I haven't been able to sit there. I mean, I was there at CU, when I was in Denver for a couple of years. I'd go watch that program in Boulder a little bit, but I had a hard time comparing it to just the pageantry and the pomp and how important college football was to Baton Rouge, to LSU, and then living in Boulder or living in Denver and going up to Boulder games and looking at, well, why are there only 30,000 people in the stadium? And you brought up a great point. They're like, because this is just a different world, like there's a whole lot more to do in living a great lifestyle in that part of the neck of the woods than necessarily there might be in Tuscaloosa in the middle of, a spring game. So, it's kind of just experiencing different walks of life help you, understand more. That's why I'm a firm proponent of traveling the world when you can. And I don't know if you like that because there's nothing that makes you feel smaller and more understanding of different aspects of life than to not be in the United States. Like to get outside of our normal circle and world and makes you understand and appreciate things so much more.
Bro, I think you might be my doppelganger because I've been to 35 some odd countries, and every year I feel it now. I feel the itch to go because I want to go somewhere and feel tiny. So I go to like India, Iceland, Cambodia, like in the middle
Love
of
it.
nowhere to do that. Okay, so I'm going to get you out of here on this. I told you at the top, this podcast is based on one question, which is, what does it mean to be human? We've talked about a lot of things around humanity. So I'm curious for you, as obviously a human being, what do you think it means to be human, and what are you now seeking in your life?
I think what it means to be human is just to be, I mean, as base level is to be a vessel to experience different things. And I don't know if that comes out the way I want it to be, but just in the fact that I've noticed in my life that there is no roadmap. Like everybody calls up and says, oh, okay, hey, what advice do you have? And I feel bad, Yogi, because sometimes I don't have it because I don't have that advice because I'm like, you need to do this, this, and this to get to this destination. I'm like, life is just all this gray, right? Like, there's no rhyme or reason to some of it. Some of it's luck. Some of it is happenstance. And to me, I think it's just being human is just embracing all of that, the good, the bad, the failures. And to me, of like what I want to get out of it and where I want my life to go is always changing. And I think that's the overall theme is how you evolve in life. So for me, my goals at first were to be a college athlete, and I did that. And then it was to marry someone that was beautiful and have a great life, and I did that. But then that failed. Okay, so now I want to start my own business. I did that, and then now I want to go do this. And so to me, I think it's always challenging. Now where I'm at in my world is I want to still be appreciative of what I do every single day, and now I want to be a family man, and that has changed in the last couple of years. Now that I have more of a family, so I think the one thing I take away from this conversation and everything is that there's just it's like a almost like a Game of Thrones. Life is like almost like Game of Thrones, and like he would write the books but not really have an ending in sight. He would just write it, and these storylines would meander however he thought was interesting. That's what our life is like. Like there's no middle, beginning, and end that's already written. At least for me, I don't believe there was. I think we kind of just continue to write it, and there's going to be some pretty crappy episodes, and there's going to be some pretty good episodes, but who the hell knows? And if you can be positive and treat people with kindness, then at least you're going to have fun doing it.
Amen, man. This is great. I want to do it again in person. I hope we can do it at the college football playoff. That'd be awesome. Your team in your conference against a team from our conference out here, man. It'd be a blast.
I just football wise related as we end this thing, I hope that's the case, man. Like I do hope because, I think in college football, I love the storylines and I love the currency of hope. And I feel like the more and more we get to these one percenters and these super yachts of college football always being there, it kind of just kills that little middle class of college football that I like and that matters. And that's why I'm pulling for the Minnesotas. I'm pulling for the Baylors. I'm pulling for, no offense, the Pac-12s who haven't been there for a while. I'd rather have them in, even though I'm the SEC network anchor, I'd rather have them in as just a fan of the sport than have the same old, well, here we go. We got Georgia and, our new one is LSU. Okay, well, they've been there before. Like, give me new storylines. Let's create a kind of a cool journey that no one's been down as opposed to the same old, same old.
Amen, brother. I love it. Thank you for the time. Really appreciate it, Peter.
All right. Looking forward to doing this and hopefully connecting over there in the college football playoff. Thanks, Yogi.
You got it, brother.